My guest tonight is from the channel AFib Patient Experience. He's put out a ton of videos about his experience with ablation, how he's changed his life to deal with his AFib, and just all kinds of stuff. I've been referred to ablation recently, and that's how I came across his video. And up until recently, all the feedback I've had about ablations have been negative. But I have to say that watching his videos and his experience has really opened my mind to the process. And now I'm actually looking forward to my referral. So, we're going to talk about some nuts and bolts of having AFib and the anxiety that it can produce in our lives today. So, I'm really glad to welcome Steve to the AFib Show Live. Hi, everyone. Welcome Steve from the AFib Patient Experience. He's a successful YouTuber covering the AFib space, and some of his greatest videos are about ablations. And Steve, I just want to say that um, when I was referred for ablation, I was dead against it until I watched your video. I didn't want to consider it. I agreed to go just to the consult, but I wasn't sold on going through with it until I watched your video, because there's a lot of negativity out there. So I'm really glad to have you today. And you want to do the quick sound check, say hi to everyone?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad you liked my ablation videos. I did those because I'd heard, like you, many different experiences, so I just wanted to share my experience so people could get that feedback.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to have you. And today that you and I met the other night on Google Meet, and we just started talking, and we became kind of instant friends, right? And
Absolutely.
we naturally went into anxiety, because it's such a I mean, speaking for myself, anxiety was a massive problem. And uh and so I think we're gonna talk about AFib anxiety for a while, because it's something we can both share our experience on. And I think I'll start us off, because I'm sure people have noticed this, and this is one of my favorite stories to tell people. But when I first had AFib, and at some point the cardiologist said to me, Danny, just go walk an hour a day. Work up to walking an hour a day. It's the best thing you can do. And so it was January, it was very cold, and I went walking up this hill. And if I walked this hill today, it wouldn't even raise my heart rate. It was such a gradual hill, but it was very cold out, and I was quite cold. And my heart started doing that thing. You don't quite go into AFib, but it beats like 5 times really fast, as if you're going to go, and then it stopped. And it did it again, and I actually got so scared, and I feel really dumb admitting it right now, but I got so scared I called my wife and had her drive 2 blocks to drive me home, because I was afraid to walk home. And then later I saw people running wearing these light up vests at night for safety. And I thought, that's great, because now if I'm out walking and I pass out, someone's going to see me lying in the snow at least, and call 911. So that's how scared I was. So I actually spent like $70 on this thing, because I was afraid to walk by myself at night. And in winter, it's night after 5 o'clock. So that was most of the night. So I? You don't look like any of this surprises you.
Not at all. No, I definitely relate to the anxiety caused by AFib. I even made a video a bit specifically about AFib anxiety. Um, for me, it was a little slower. AFib came on. You hear people have it come on where they're sent to the hospital at their first episode, or you hear other people who have AFib and they don't even know it. But for me, it came on really gradual. Just walking up the stairs one day, and I could feel my heart like flopping in my chest, and then I was short of breath and a little lightheaded, and I was like, "What's going on?" So I took my pulse, kind of like what you just said. I'd have 3 quick beats, a short beat, it'd skip a beat. It was going crazy. So one thing I noticed at the exact same time was, in addition to my heart being crazy, I just had this like cloud come over me, this like overwhelm and anxiety, like almost immediately. Um, as I got AFib, this anxiety came over me. And early on, as my AFib episodes would come, the anxiety would come with them. But then I noticed something in between the episodes is I'd start being really stressed and anxious about the next AFib episode. So I think it kind of comes in two ways, during the episode, but also the anticipation for when's this AFib going to come back. So
So when you would go into AFib, I mean, it's a really mixed. There's guys who just it sort of barely bothers them, and there's people who are more like me where it's really debilitating. So where on that scale are you when you go
yeah.
into AFib?
So early on, they were very minor episodes. I would just notice my heart beating, lightheaded. I'd exercise during an AFib episode. I went on mountain bike rides. It was really difficult because I couldn't catch my breath. And early on, I had no idea this was happening. I was fortunate they'd only last, maybe an hour at a time early on. But as time went on, they slowly got longer and would come more frequently. So
Yeah, you could almost feel the progression by what you're describing.
absolutely.
Like you could
Oh,
feel it
absolutely.
progressing, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
did you ever find that you'd get the palpitations and you'd be stressing out, and then that would just take you into an episode?
Yes. So one of my worst episodes, it usually accompanied like being stressed or, I shouldn't say always, usually, but usually, if I was more stressed or kind of having a rough day, my heart was much more likely to go into AFib. My son had a surgery where they were going to put him under anesthesia, and that day I was super stressful day, as you can imagine, and my heart went into AFib, and this was the first time it had lasted for multiple days. So
Wow.
yeah, but the progression is absolutely right. I remember sitting in
So
my
you just
doctor's
went on for a
office.
few days in AFib.
I did, yeah,
What got you
but
out of it?
time, I have no
Yeah,
idea. Yep,
just on its own, just converted
yeah,
back on your own. Mm.
yep, and we might get in this later, but I took several medications, flecainide, the main one, had no effect on my AFib. No matter how
Wow.
much I would take, and my doctor would raise my prescription, have me take more at a
Okay,
time.
let's get into that later.
Okay,
Absolutely.
absolutely,
I
yeah,
want to go down that road. Okay.
yeah,
Corey here, when I first went to the hospital, palpitations, the doctor said maybe you just have anxiety. I mean, this is something I've heard. Even Big said
yeah.
yesterday, he went in the hospital a few times and they thought it's just anxiety, right? I must be kidding me. He has anxiety if you were having palpitations. I know it seems obvious, right? It seems
Yeah.
when you're in the patient chair and you're feeling that, it's not in your head. And I think when a doctor says it's anxiety, what he means is you have the medical term of anxiety. What I know is a medical condition of anxiety. What we hear is you don't believe me. And I think that's a distinction that just increases our anxiety. Right? When we're told it's probably your anxiety. It's used as a way to dismiss people.
Absolutely, that's a great point. That when people tell you it's just anxiety, that increases your anxiety. That's yeah. I When I first got AFib, before I knew I had AFib, I thought maybe this was anxiety causing. I did all kinds of Google searches. Does anxiety make your heart skip beats? Things like that. There's a lot of confusing information out there about that, but it is kind of concerning to hear a doctor say something like that, especially when like you said, you're having heart palpitations. A doctor, you that's who you'd want to be able to distinguish between the two. So
Yeah, and it can be. I mean, there doctors have they're human like us. There's ones with a
right,
great, ability to empathize, and some not so great. Um, for me, I'm always been a fan of as long as they seem confident, I really don't care. But that's not everyone for sure. Um, so were you like, what restrictions would you put on your life out of this anxiousness?
it's a great question. First, I would limit myself in social situations. There were things, going out with my friends, just even small things like going with even with my family and brothers. I would definitely limit myself for fear, an AFib episode would come. But there's just almost like a cloud of fogginess or darkness over my life with AFib. It really, I've said this before. I feel like a really confident person. I felt very capable. If there's something I want to do, I would just do it. I knew I could always achieve that. But when AFib came in my life, I got much more weak. I'm worried. I was constantly second guessing myself, questioning my decisions. I was much less confident in social situations. Even with friends, I was just, just that anxiety. It was really debilitating for me.
How often were you checking your pulse?
Every day, like multiple, like all day long. Yeah, yeah. Or even not as much early on because I didn't even know I had AFib, and it would come, and then when it would go, my life would go back just go back to complete normal, and I would question myself like, what happened? Like, where did that come from? And it was gone. I think, okay, it's not coming back. I couldn't imagine it coming back in that
Right.
moment, and then out of the blue, it just bam, hits me, and you're like, here it is, and it's and it accompanied, the heart going crazy, and then that cloud of anxiety every time. So.
I see, like what you're describing to me sounds a bit like, you have these, it's almost like in the stages of grief, you have denial and you have bargaining.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm going to Google, I just can't be AFib. I mean, you know what I mean? Because
absolutely, denial, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I see the denial in my community sometimes whenever I stress the fact that AFib's a progressive disease, and if you're not pushing back against it, it keeps marching on. Because I'll without fail have someone say, I haven't done anything in a year and I haven't had AFib. It's a form of denial. I mean, AFib has a very clear progression, well documented, well known. It follows the same for everyone. No one goes from permanent to paroxysmal. They always go from paroxysmal
right.
to persistent to permanent. It's a
absolutely.
very clear. I mean, you might be traveling down the highway at a different speed, and that's usually where I see the denial is people want to think, okay, because I haven't had an episode in a year, because I've been living like a virtual prisoner and not doing anything, I've stopped it progressing. You probably haven't, and you probably should just go live your life a bit and maybe find a way to push back against it. And if you're trapped in your house, you great to do stuff, you haven't created any releases for that stress either, which at some point is just going to come back and visit you some more. It's not dissimilar to feeling trapped in a job you hate and that type of stress, right? And you
absolutely.
sort of put yourself in the same box.
Yep, absolutely.
So were you someone who exercised at all prior to being diagnosed?
Yeah, I used to love to exercise. I was, not like a, they say an endurance athlete, but I did do, I go on long bike rides. I ran a couple half marathons. Nothing big, just casual things for fun, kind of more of a hobby. I was a big weightlifter. Not like you, like powerlifting, but just just be in the gym, doing your regular weightlifting exercise regularly. But with AFib, I pretty much stopped all of that because I just every time I'd start getting my heart rate up, I would get concerned that AFib was going to strike. I'd be taking my pulse, and it's not until recently, after my ablation, and even then, it took about 6 months before I dared start lifting weights again. I mostly would walk, but I've started even running a little bit and back to bike riding. So, but it definitely having AFib limited my exercise for sure. I was mostly out of the fear and anxiety that that what this was doing to my AFib, if it was going to have an episode during exercising.
So just having the ablation and being, are you symptom free? Do you still get palpitation?
Symptom free, completely symptom free.
But you still have some of the anxiety, right? Like
I do. The anxiety did not subside with the ablation, not at all. No, and I made a couple of videos documenting my, kind of I think I did one 6 or 8 months after, then I did one 18 months after, and in both of those, one of the main points that I address is that, although I feel great physically, I'm exercising again, I'm doing a lot of things, the anxiety is still there. The worry, it's still not there. But I will say it has improved. The longer I've gone without AFib, I do feel it improving, but it's still there.
Time heals all wounds, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, for me with weightlifting, because I was a competing powerlifter, and actually when AFib came on, I was on track for Canadian Nationals, and I'm a spreadsheet kind of guy, and I'd analyze all the competition, and I really felt that I was going to get bronze or silver if I just followed the track I was on. And so I was so eager to get back in the gym after my first cardio version.
I'm sure.
And I went back in about 2 days later, and I bench pressed, and I ended up back in the hospital that night. And it really seemed that bench pressing was the worst. Um, and I changed the way I breathe on the bench press. So now I bench press, and I've figured out that I always go into AFib in the evening. So now I only weightlift in the mornings.
Okay.
Right? And it's all about playing the odds, right? So
Yeah.
I only weightlift in the mornings, and I will not weightlift if I haven't had a good solid 7 hours sleep or more that night. I will skip my workout and not weightlift because I know that lack of sleep makes me more vulnerable. And
Absolutely.
for the bench press, I actually breathe now the opposite way I was trained to. So I would do like a big inhale, right? And so now I actually exhale on the way down, so it's empty, in an effort to take pressure off the heart.
Okay.
And same with squatting. I don't do the Valsalvo maneuver where you hold your breath and push against your belly.
Okay.
I mean, you can see why with AFib that would be a bad idea with 300 and 400 pounds on your back, right? So now I only do the Valsalvo maneuver if I'm doing like a 1 rep max test, and I just try to keep like 5 reps. If I'm doing 5 reps or under, I find I don't need the Valsalvo maneuver anyway. So so that's been, I mean, but it's kind of anxiety that had me thinking up all this stuff, combined with I need to get back to it, but I'm afraid to set it off. And I have to say, of all exercises, the bench press is the one would trigger me more than anything. It was always after a bench press session. And I know another power lifter who's in my AFib group, and he's actually like a European champion. He's way beyond anywhere I ever was, and he finds the same thing, really bad palpitations after a bench press. Seems unique in that regard. So I always thought it would be the overhead stuff, but that seems to be fine.
Okay.
How about cardio, where you raise your heart rate for like a half an hour?
I'm still more worried to do that than I was. I would do that regularly, probably 3 or 4 times a week, go on a mountain bike ride or just a short jog, nothing big ever. But it took me probably at least a year after my ablation before I'd really go on a good run. And even now, I don't love running. I shouldn't say I love running, but I don't trust my heart to go on runs right now. Bike riding a little more. I do more bike riding now because I think it's because you can just kind of coast on bike riding a little bit, not just keep your heart pumping like with running. So
Have you found yourself like not going on trips you'd otherwise go on, things like this?
I at first, especially when I had AFib, I needed to travel for work a couple times, and I got out of those trips. I didn't blame it on AFib. I came up with other things. Told them I can't travel. Yeah, I was very worried to travel. Didn't want to get on a plane. Didn't want to have to work things were really stressful with AFib. Meetings, just even wondering if my mind was going to be sharp. With the anxiety and all the things that AFib did to me mentally. I wasn't sure if I could even do my job well anymore. So that was definitely stressful. Yeah,
So you
definitely
don't
avoid
have to give me
travel.
details, but would you describe your job as a high stakes,
Yeah,
high pressure kind of job, or?
not too much. I'm a type of analyst, and yeah, I don't really want to go into it either. It's mostly boring stuff. It's kind of work at your own pace, but I do use you know, probably similar to something you do, where you're just mostly thinking all day. You're kind of mind exhausting a little bit, but not too high pressure. I wouldn't say for the
Yeah.
most part. Yeah.
Um, I'll talk a bit about me when I there was a big change in my personality after my first AFib, and I was always more of a type A guy, and I've definitely had a type A high pressure job. I mean, I was a logistics analyst, but everything in logistics is time critical, right? And they would throw me all the problems. If no one knew how to solve it, it would come to me. So every problem I had was big and urgent, and it was very stressful. And I could deal with it. I'd be in a bad mood sometimes, but I never lost my temper. Never lost my temper. And after AFib, I found myself, even now, I will lose my temper when put under a lot of stress, and I'll just blast someone. And I feel terrible after. I feel absolutely terrible after, and I apologize after. And I don't understand how having AFib somehow set my baseline from functional to occasionally dysfunctional. And it's not just the fact that you have a, like, when you first go on the beta blockers, you're like, they rob you of energy. And then I was on all these blood pressure medications. They were making me dizzy. But even as I got fit and I was dealing with my stress in a healthy way, it would still happen when, like, I mean, a couple of times in meetings at work, I really let the guys have it and just felt so bad after it. Have you found that you're at a new baseline since the AFib, or was it less dramatic?
Absolutely. No, you know, with AFib, I definitely got similar to you. I was much more moody is the word I think I usually use, but anger would come on. And I've always been, super peaceful, um, I don't know, really easygoing person. But with AFib, definitely got more angry. It even caused problems, with my wife, where I was just such a much more angry person at work. I think people were less likely to come and ask me things. Yeah, this all changed when AFib came. It was almost like flipping a switch.
Right. Buzz, I'm glad you asked that, because we're getting to that in a few minutes. So I'll put your question back on the screen.
Corey had another question that came across that I just want to answer really quick, because I just want to let him know. He talked about having trouble getting diagnosed, and he would go in and have an ECG or EKG,
right,
and they wouldn't find it. That exact same thing happened to me. My heart, when I was in AFib, it was going crazy, but when it was not in AFib, my heart was perfect. In fact, the first time I saw an actual cardiologist, because I was diagnosed by my primary care doctor, cardiologist ran an EKG on me, and he turned and looked at me. He said, "Are you here for AFib?" Because he had no idea. They couldn't find it in my heart, because when it was in rhythm, it was in rhythm, but when it was out, it was out. So I'm sure that's what's happened with you, it sounds like.
In the book, The Haywire Heart, I don't know if you've read it or not, but it deals with athletes who have AFib and other heart rhythm, and they're like the lone AFib people. These people are in, beyond top shape. They're running 3-hour marathons, and a lot of them dealt with cross-country skiers in Europe that were, doing the loppets that take like 8 hours, and they would have heart conditions. And they told the story of one woman who went undiagnosed for 20 years because they would bring her in and put her on the stress test. And the guy had the stress test maxed out, and her heart rate was only like 135. And he was like, "Okay, just get out of here. There's no way there's anything wrong with you." And then one day she just passed out in a race. And, her heart rate was like going 280. So, yeah, so it just, you go in and they give you this 30-second ECG. And maybe you wear a Holter monitor overnight. In Canada, I never see anyone getting a loop recorder, and I admired that about the U.S., that people get these implantable loop recorders, and they have them for like a month or 3 months. We don't seem to use them here, but at least my cardiologist, he gave me 7 days on the Holter monitor, and try and get a clear picture, and even that, if you go 7 days or even 3 days and you don't have AFib, well, that tells them something too, right? That also tells them where you're at. So Corey, yeah, don't let the you're gonna meet all kinds of doctors in your life if you have AFib, and they're gonna be good and bad. But you have to self-advocate. I even made a video about that, how to self-advocate with doctors, because it can be difficult. So good.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are going through that, Corey. I've heard a lot of people who comment on my page about that exact thing you're saying. They know something's going on. They feel their heart doing something, and they go to their doctor, and their doctor, often can't find it, or often, like, sounds like with you, they're somewhat dismissive, or trying to, maybe.
Yeah, and at this time, there's some hospitals are extremely busy and backed up, so it's even worse. So yeah. So I think I'm going to revisit Buzz's question. And can you read it? I'll let you.
I can read it. Yes.
Okay. Working on getting an ablation schedule, but fearful of the procedure. Any helpful advice for those contemplating Buzz, come on the right day, because we have the ablation man here.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my ablation. So I had an ablation. It's coming up. It'll be 2 years in February since my ablation, and I felt the exact same way. I did not want to do an ablation. I did everything I could. My doctor gave me a specific set of lifestyle changes to do. Lose weight, no alcohol, no bad habits, smoking, get good sleep. De-stress by doing meditations, yoga, all kinds of things. So I stuck to that perfectly. I felt like I'd lost weight. I was doing everything my doctor told me, but despite all that, my AFib continued to get worse. And at the time, I was taking flecainide, and it did nothing to my AFib. So as we've talked about, AFib's progressive, and as my AFib progressed from maybe a short episode every 3 days, maybe once a week, maybe an hour at a time, and after a few months it was starting to go 2 episodes a week, and just slowly progressed. And after about a year and a half, my episodes were coming probably 2 times a week, and they're lasting over 24 hours a day. And that was when my doctor said it's time for the ablation. So I know in different countries they have different standards. In the US, where I am, and I guess it's mostly for the insurance company I have, they require you to try some less invasive procedures, like taking medications and stuff, before the doctor says this isn't working, we've got to do the ablation.
Right.
But to get into the procedure, I was again really worried. That's one reason I was so focused on doing everything I could not to have it. I just become a father. I had like a 2-year-old at the time, and I thought my life was going great. And when AFib came, I just couldn't believe it. And now they want me to have this procedure where they're in there burning my heart, or freezing, whatever procedure they decide to use for you. But basically, doing a heart procedure on me, I just couldn't believe that I needed that at this point in my life. So eventually, when my episodes were getting so long, I was desperate. And as some of we were talking about with the anxiety, as my episodes got longer, my anxiety increased significantly. I was having a harder time functioning just with day-to-day activities. But the experience was a lot easier than I thought it would be. And, I arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m. I was super nervous. I think my hands were shaking. I got in there, my wife took me. And the strange thing was, as we kind of talked about, when I was really nervous, had some stressful things, my heart would always go into AFib. But on this day of my ablation, for some strange reason, my heart is in perfect sinus rhythm, which I couldn't believe or explain. I remember asking my electrophysiologist about that. I was really worried, can you do an ablation while my heart's in sinus rhythm? And he assured me for the procedure I was having, it was no problem. But after arriving at 6 a.m., they give you an IV, met with my doctor. I had general anesthesia, so I met the anesthesiologist, answer any questions you have, check your blood to see if you have on blood thinners, which I was still on a blood thinner at the time, so they account for that. It was pretty low key in there. There were tons of people lined up that day. I was lucky I had the first ablation of the day. I was walked into the cath lab once I got my IV, and I said goodbye to my wife. We went to the cath lab, which was this huge room. I didn't expect it to be so big, and there were monitors and people working all over the place. There were a couple of nurses working on the monitors, and they got me on the table. I got up on the table they have. It's a narrow little table, and it's also really cold in there. If you ever watch my ablation video, I describe my ablation. I think I mentioned like 4 times how cold it is in there. It's kind of awkward.
Like surgery rooms and medical surgery rooms are always cold.
They are. But it was freezing. Of course, I'm only wearing a hospital gown, nothing else, and then the little funny socks the hospital makes you wear. But yeah, I laid on the table, and this is where my story differs from a lot of people outside the U.S., because I've heard from several people, especially in Europe, where they were awake during their ablation, the local anesthesia, where I went under general anesthesia, so they answered any questions. I laid back on the table. The anesthesiologist put a mask on me and told me to breathe deeply, and the next thing I remember, I was in the recovery room. So it all just went by, like in the blink of an eye.
Well, I'm referred for mine, and I can't seem to get anyone at the clinic to give me the appointment. They're so backed up in Canada. So anyway, may as well start a YouTube channel while I wait.
You should, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely know a lot of people
look who joined the conversation. Our guest from last night. He's a big fan.
Oh yeah.
Shout out, Big Said.
This is Said. Yeah, Said. I watched
Yeah.
you guys' video. You guys did a great job.
We got to do a three-way collaboration after Said gets through his procedure, and you two can compare notes. I'll just eat popcorn.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great. So, where my mind was going somewhere with this original conversation, but like this, I don't even know what they're going to do. So I don't have any instructions whether I'll be knocked out or not. And it's funny thing that the scariest thing to me is not the ablation. It's the other catheter.
Yeah.
That's what scares me. Like, it's crazy, I know, and I just have this thing like I don't want to be touched there, right? And
Yeah.
and they're going to do it. So I'm really hoping they. I just went under general anesthetic for the first time in my life for a dentist, and it was the best dental visit of my life. So I'm hoping it'll be more like that. And they just knock me out, and when I wake up, it's pretty much done, and I just lay in bed and stay still for 4 hours, which is sort of my dream job anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping for that.
Yeah. That's exactly what it was for me. I mean, that first part was very stress free. I mean, I'm super nervous going into it, but once the anesthesia hits, I had no memories until I woke up. And then you're in that first recovery room just for a couple minutes. I remember the nurse. I had oxygen in my nose, and I was still kind of coming out of anesthesia, and they wheeled me back into the initial waiting room I was in, where my wife was waiting. And then they immediately they wouldn't let me sit up. Immediately, every hour they would move me up just a little bit of the angle. But I wanted to sit up because my back was starting to hurt. I think that was probably my worst pain, was just my back. I think the ablation table, that's narrow and hard, you lay on, and then just laying on your back for all those hours causes a lot of people's backs to cramp up. I've heard that from several people, and it definitely did for me. But yeah, in this recovery room, they almost immediately brought me food. They wanted me to eat. About every, I'd say 20 minutes, the nurse would come in and she'd lift up my gown and check my ablation incisions to make sure I wasn't bleeding. And I had one in the neck and then two in the groin. So where my catheter, or where they inserted the catheters. But yeah, it was just mostly relaxing, talking to my wife in there. My throat was really sore when I started eating. I noticed that. Somebody had told me it was anesthesia, but somebody else told me they may have stuck a camera down my throat to check for blood clots before the ablation. I actually don't know. I want to ask my doctor. But originally I thought it was from the anesthesia. But I also heard that's not uncommon to have a sore throat. But honestly, it was mostly painless. You getting an IV in your arm stings, but if you move your arm a weird way, it pinches. But I think most of us have had that, so that was some pain. And I was just so relieved coming out of the ablation.
How long before you were allowed to walk around, and how long were you before you could resume some activity, and how long before you could return to work?
So my doctor told me I could actually go to work the next day if I want to. He said, I don't suggest it. Yep, he said, you'll be tired, you won't want to. He says, if you absolutely have to, you can. But he said, give it, usually he recommends people take a few days. And in my work, I was fine. I took a whole week off, which was great. Yeah. As far as getting back to activity, so after the ablation, they didn't really let me move for 4 hours. I think I laid on that bed 4 hours. I ate. And again, they would incline my bed a little bit every hour. I don't know. That would slowly progress me up, and they just continually checked those incision spots, making sure they weren't bleeding. And then my doctor came to let me know how things had gone, and he got me up. I went on a walk with him. We went and walked around the hospital. Everything felt good, and he released me. So at 2 p.m. I was headed home. So I like to say
you were home for dinner.
Home for dinner. Yeah. Wow. I like to say I'd spent a year and a half fighting AFib by changing everything in my lifestyle, all the stress, worry, all the medications, and doing everything I could in all the worry, and then in 8 short hours in a hospital, my AFib was gone. So it was a...
Looking back, are you wishing they had just done the ablation straight out of the gate before your AFib had progressed?
It probably would have been best. At the time, I would have never wanted to do that. I had committed to, maybe never have an ablation, so I know exactly how you guys feel about not wanting one. I did not want to mess with my heart. I just thought I can solve this myself, or it'll go away, or I was in denial. But yeah, as it got worse, and my risk for stroke skyrocketed at that time too. I wasn't on any blood thinners, and my, with my episodes lasting, over 24 hours, my doctor, he's like, you got to do this. So yeah, and I just
So you didn't take blood thinners at all, like ever, throughout this?
I didn't until when he scheduled me for my ablation. When
Okay.
my episodes started lasting longer, because they were so short at first, but no, they didn't. They didn't initially prescribe me blood thinners, but when it was getting bad, and I called him up, my doctor, and this is when it was actually pretty quick. It was in January of 2021, and I told him, my episodes are getting longer, and he's like, immediately come in. He had me come right in, and he immediately put me on Eliquis. So at that
Yeah.
time, and
Have you ever seen the video by your cardiology where he talks about why he keeps his patients on blood thinners after ablation?
I have, yes, I definitely have.
It's kind of contrary to everything we see everywhere else.
Yeah, he seems like his if this same one, he says pretty much every patient who has an ablation still has a risk for stroke and should be on blood thinners for life. Is that kind of
Yeah.
what you've seen? Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
well, the long-term follow-ups show that they're just that you haven't reduced their risk of stroke at all.
yeah.
Um, Now, there's obviously probably co-founders in the data. Like you're an analyst, you know how that goes. Is it if you're scheduled for ablation, you've probably already got other problems, and you may or may not have addressed them, and et
Yep.
cetera, and so on.
Yep.
So, but I think it would show in long-term studies that they would be able to control for some of that. And but what I find interesting and that is never talked about is there's a little dirty little secret to blood thinners, and I found this out after I'd been on them over a year. But apparently, if you've been on blood thinners like long term, let's say 5 or 6 months or longer, and if you go off them ever, you double your chances again of a stroke. So if you've been on them long term, you should probably just stay on them your whole life. And I was
Yeah.
like, when I found that out, I was quite upset that I wasn't informed of that when I was put on.
Right.
But I can understand why, because I wouldn't have gone on them, and he probably really wanted me on them. Because my Chad Vask at the time was probably here in Canada. We use a Chad Vask 2. So there's Chad Vask, and Chad Vask 2, and Chad Vask 2 is basically almost nobody's a zero. It's the strictest one, and I was like a 4 or 5. So my risk of a stroke was like 5% a year, and so I it's probably best I went on them, but I'm still mad about it.
No, I understand. That on my YouTube channel. That's the number one comment I get is everybody asks, were you able to get off blood thinners? Were you able to get off medications? Everybody wants to get off the medications. I completely understand that. Yeah, I definitely do. It's
Moonglow, that's interesting. I've read about phlebotomies, so people go and donate blood. The problem is because I'm on a blood thinner, I can't go donate blood. Oh, one of my studio lights, the battery's dying now. But because I'm on a blood thinner, they won't let me donate blood, and I would have to go off the blood thinner for 6 weeks in Canada before I could donate blood. But I believe in donating blood, and I also know that it is actually healthy for you to go donate blood like every 3 months. It's a very healthy practice, and of course it benefits others. So thanks for bringing that up. Have you ever considered donating blood for your own health, not to help other people?
I have a story about donating blood. When I was still questioning what I had, if it was an AFib, what this is just things I didn't have a clue what was going on with my heart. I was donating blood, and they have a CNA or somebody come and they do your pulse, your blood pressure, all that. She kept trying to take my pulse, and I was having an AFib episode. I could tell this day something was off, and she kept saying your heart is really irregular, and that was a confirmation for me, like, oh, this isn't just in my head. This isn't something that I'm just like making up. Like other people can feel this, because I had questioned if this is just maybe something that, is it really not in rhythm? Is this just something I'm making up? Am I just having anxiety? So it was someone at a blood donation clinic that actually confirmed for me, like, there's something really wrong here.
Yeah. So Moonglow is in permanent AFib on meds and Eliquis. Yeah. So if you're permanently in AFib, obviously it becomes a no-brainer, I think, at that point. I think the luxury people have who are in paroxysmal AFib like us is they have the luxury of denial. And I see it as a luxury. You can deny you need the medications, and you can deny that you should lose weight, and you can deny you got to eat better and control your blood sugar and get to sleep. And another place I see a lot of denial is sleep apnea and getting the CPAP mask. And I see a lot of people, I don't need that. They don't even want to get tested. But there's probably like a 60% chance they have sleep apnea just because they have AFib.
Yeah, I went and got tested because I was worried that would cause my AFib.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have it. So.
Yeah. So, well, we've really, I mean, your experience with ablation. Walk me through when you got AFib, when you decided to start broadcasting on YouTube, and then when you found out you were going to get for ablation. How did that path all come out?
So I didn't make any YouTube videos till after my ablation. So yeah, I got AFib it was in 2019. I got AFib, and I still trying to decide the first day. I think it was probably in the summertime when I had these tiny little episodes, and I wasn't sure I quite noticed them. But I remember in that fall doing a lot of research about, is this just anxiety? What's going on with my heart? And then it wasn't until January of 2020 that I got in to my primary care doctor, kind of like what Corey was going through, where my heart was actually in AFib, and got an EKG where he found it. And I remember that day, he looked at me, he gave me that kind of a puzzled look. He's like, you have AFib, or you have atrial fibrillation. And I mean, I was just like my heart dropped. I was like I couldn't believe it. I was in complete denial at that point. I'm like, I'm so healthy. Like, I've been priding myself on like being the healthiest person I can be, and here my heart's malfunctioning. So
when you were told you had AFib, how much did you know about what it means to have AFib? Like, did you know what that meant?
I should have known more because you and I have discussed, but my dad got AFib, but he got it just a year before me. So he was almost 70. He got AFib. So I kind of thought, it might be in my genes. There's a good chance I may get AFib someday. But for me, I was 41. So, it's more common in people over 65. So it just never occurred to me. I also thought my dad had some bad habits that I don't have. He much heavier drinker, didn't really exercise, had some stuff like that. I thought, he probably got it from just not taking very good care of himself, so I'm going to take really good care of myself. And then it just hit me, and I was leveled. But so I knew a little bit about him. He'd had an ablation not long before that. So I knew about it, but I didn't know the details at all. So
yeah, so you would be considered to have lone AFib. You don't have other comorbidities. You don't have high blood pressure. You're not obese, obviously.
No.
Diabetes, no sleep apnea. Your cholesterol's not 800. So you have lone AFib. And whenever I'm talking to someone with lone AFib, it's the same story. They get AFib and they find out shortly after that it runs in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting. With the lone AFib, it seems it's very much a genetic, at least, I mean, that's not a scientific study asking my YouTube people, but that it's one of those recurring themes with the lone AFibers. Like I have an extremely big, I have over 100 first cousins. I have a very big family.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know a single one of them that has AFib. I know some that have strokes and heart attacks and cancers, but not a single one who's had AFib. So I guess I'm lucky. So I guess my way to look at that, I said it last night too, is that at my age, I'm 52. I've had friends die now of other things. I've hit that age where now, your friends sometimes die. And I just feel like I'm in a way lucky enough that I got something I can do something about with lifestyle. Because if I had gotten cancer or a brain tumor or like some lymphoma or something like that, man, I don't know what I'd do. I really don't. And I think I just see AFib as, in hindsight, one of the best things that's happened to me, because it made me treat my diabetes with exercise, made me lose weight. Probably I added 10 years to my life because I have AFib, and I guess I'm always one to learn the hard way and caught a break.
That's
Where
great.
someone like you, it comes out of nowhere, you're blindsided.
I was, yeah, really was. Yeah, that's great that
Wow.
you've recognized that, and you're looking at it in a really positive way, which is it's probably a very healthy way to look at it. So.
Well, it took a long time to get there. Probably I didn't feel that way until I really started losing weight and looked back on my journey, because I felt robbed and cheated for a long time. Like I said, I was on track to competing nationally in the Masters. I definitely had the numbers, and I felt I was going to be a contender when this came on, and I felt robbed of that experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now I looking back, like I'll watch. I have on this channel was where I used to just throw a couple of powerlifting videos, so I didn't take up storage on my phone, so I could just show people, hey, this is my meat, and this is me doing high pulls with 700 pounds, and I turned it into my AFib channel because I already had it, and I like the name, and
Yeah.
I really felt robbed, and I had one time designs to turn this into a powerlifting channel, and I really felt robbed of that, and now looking back, I plan to do a video one day called cooking AFib, the perfect recipe, or I'll show my old pictures and videos, and like looking back, I was like the perfect candidate. I did everything right. If you wanted to get AFib, you would do what I would do. You would do zero cardio. You would lift a ton of really heavy weight 5-6 days a week. You would eat terribly. You would sleep terribly. You ignore your apnea. You'd tell your doctor you're not going on those blood pressure meds, and you would just do everything I did. And so I do feel I got a wake up call, but I got lucky in wake up call I got. So tell me how having a YouTube channel and exposing yourself to the world and getting the feedback and possibly criticism, how has that affected your anxiety?
For the most part, it's been really good for my anxiety. My goal was to make videos that I would want to see before when I first got AFib or when I had my ablation. So and the community that's built, some of my videos get quite a few comments, and we have people, super supportive community. I like 99.9% of the comments are just supportive. People are all commenting, giving each other encouragement, thanking me for sharing my story. Like I said, it's a pretty personal story. But yeah, that was my goal, was to kind of have a community or people or someone who's scared about having AFib or scared about having an ablation, somewhere where they could see my experience. And I was really lucky, very fortunate that so far things have went really well for me. And and my doctor told me that. He said the majority of people, the ablation is not that big of a deal, and it works great. It's perfect. But I have heard from people on my channel who they do say, like, that was not my experience at all. It was really hard on me. It was terrible. In fact, my dad's ablation was not easy. He said he would never do it again, although he did. But after his first one, he said, I would never do that again. It was terrible. So yeah, but to answer your question, it's actually probably helped my anxiety. I've loved hearing from people. We're all in the same boat. We all have this in common, this AFib, and it's great to have a community of people to bounce stuff off of, or even just see what other people are experiencing. It makes you feel less alone, because I think having AFib can be a pretty lonely experience for a lot of us.
Yeah, and I find YouTube is the best platform, the least toxic social media platform. Maybe it's the long form nature. People come here to learn. They come here to learn how to solve a problem they have, or they want to see parts of the world they can't normally see. They usually come with a positive intent in the first place. And I find the community on YouTube is like Facebook is toxic by comparison, and that's probably compared to Twitter. It's a garden, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think YouTube is I'm really glad I met you and Sed and others, because I really think us AFibbers, man, we're gonna build a home on YouTube. This
Absolutely.
community we got
Yeah.
going.
I think
So
so.
wow. When you were first diagnosed, did you have that feeling of loneliness that I had? This utter, dark, despairing loneliness?
Those words are perfect. Yeah. Dark despair for sure. And loneliness. Yeah. I felt, and betrayed. I think betrayed is a great word. Um,
Yeah.
Betrayed from my body, like you know, I kind of had my life planned to go a certain way, and literally overnight everything changed. Not just worrying about me physically, but mentally, AFib was so hard on me. Um, so yeah, absolutely, um, definitely, definitely changed my life overnight. So.
Wow. So you haven't been on any medication for a long time now?
I haven't, not since it was 1 month after the ablation. I saw my doctor for my post-ablation follow-up, and normally he would leave people on for a couple months after that. And like we've talked about, blood thinners. I think the majority of people stay on, forever, just to be safe with the risk of
Yeah.
stroke. But yeah, he allowed me to get off everything. He said, "You're doing so well," and he knew all the things I'd done to live a healthy life. Like, I'm trying to be as healthy as I possibly can. So he allowed me to get off at that time. With like I've told you, he told me you have to have an EKG watch where you're able to take an EKG on yourself at least every day. And something that's monitoring your AFib.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have been off all medications since 1 month after my ablation. So it'll be 2 years in March.
Do you ever just monitor your blood pressure and blood sugar and things like that, or you're good?
I do my blood pressure. Yeah, I always monitor my blood pressure. I have a blood pressure cuff, and then I'm trying to definitely stick with my regular doctor's appointments, anything like that, and take their advice. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely blood sugar not so much, but definitely blood pressure, and of course my heart. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you spent the hour with me tonight, and I really appreciated your videos. Like, I found you because and the Facebook support groups, all I see is people going for their third, fourth, or fifth ablation.
Mm-hmm.
And Big Set and I were talking about this last night. Like, I think we're both in agreement. The first one, you got to try it. The second one is a maybe, but I can't imagine a world where I ever go for a third. But I think in the U.S. in particular, it stands out where people are going for a fourth and fifth. Like in Canada, the only person I know who's gone for more than three, he's a young fella when he started
Okay.
having heart rhythm problems, and it's because he had a birth defect. So they
Okay.
keep trying to
Yeah.
address that physical, and here I don't think they would send you for a third except under really unique circumstances like that. So
That's kind of how I
just
understood
an
it too.
observation.
Yeah, my doctor, he pointed out, he said the first ablation often very successful, but I can't remember the exact percentage, but I want to say 70% chance. But he said the second ablation is like next level success. I said I thought it was in the 90%. So he had me prepared
Yeah.
for 2 ablations right off.
Yeah, and then after that, there's a big diminishing return, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I don't hear of 3 very often either. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Well,
not sure
so
I did a great job
if you
explaining.
woke up
Sorry.
tomorrow, if you woke up in tomorrow in AFib, it would be a no-brainer to get the second one.
I would do it again. Yeah, I would. I would do a
Yeah.
second ablation. Like I said, it was. I was very fortunate. My experience was really good. The ablation was honestly for me not a big deal.
So
The build up.
since your experience was so positive, are you willing to share the medical center name so other people might be interested in
Yeah, it was
reaching out to them?
St. Mark's Hospital. It's in Salt Lake City, Utah. So,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah. Well,
It was.
it's been a blast having you, and I've enjoyed our talks outside of the live stream. And this is your first live
It
stream.
is. Yeah.
Are we
It
going to
is.
see you doing some live streams now?
We may. I don't know. I don't know that I'm great at them. So, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate having me on.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's great. So I think my tradition here that I started is I let the guests close the show with the parting advice. And I would like you to just address the people that we have two. We have Big Set and we have two people that are scheduled for an ablation very shortly, and I'm being referred for ablation. So
Mhm.
we could really use a pep talk right now. So I'll let you take us out with your best pep talk.
All right. Yes, I completely understand what you guys are feeling. I felt the exact same way. I didn't want an ablation. I was scared, and honestly, the worst part though was just that build up. It was the days before the ablation. You know, the worry, the questioning, the research, like what could go wrong. You know, do I really have to do this? That was definitely the worst part. Once I got to the hospital, you know, and the staff got me in there and got me into the process, everything went so fast. It was over before I knew it, and it was life changing. Like, you know, like my life, AFib just flew into disarray for, you know, it was in disarray for like almost, you know, 18 months. I had felt like I had no control of my life, and I was just constantly worrying about AFib. I was in the hospital for those 8 hours, and I haven't had AFib since. So I think, you know, it's the best treatment out there right now, and it's they're getting better technology every day. My doctor even told me that he's like, the longer you put off an ablation, do it. You know, and that was 2 years ago. He's like, because we just get better and better at doing them. So, you know, for you guys, I hope nothing but the best. I'm praying for you, and I hope you guys have the same success I had.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, like I said, I feel better talking to you. I feel a lot more willing to give it an honest shot. And I'm just gonna let everyone know. Go YouTube slash at the AFib at AFib patient experience. YouTube has these handles now, so all you need to
Yeah.
know is you remember the ad. It's great. I'm glad they finally did this. Go subscribe to his channel. He doesn't publish as often as me, but his videos are great. And if you go, he's got like some list videos, questions, concerns about ablation stuff. And as well, he's got lots of videos where he just talks about the process and that, and it's, it gets you out of hearing the negativity on the subject sometime. And it's I'm just so grateful I came across just even your videos, even if you hadn't want to come on the channel. So everyone go through a sub at AFID patient experience, and follow him along. And I guess we'll bid everyone a good night. And Steve, I'll get you to stay on because I'm gonna transition to the outro, and you and I we can just wrap up together. And
Of
sound good?
course, yeah. Yeah,
Every,
thanks everyone. Take care, everybody.
yeah, thanks for all the comments, everyone. And I see a couple of you
Yeah,
are
but
making friends in chat. That's great. Everyone, have a
if
great night and a good week ahead. Thanks for coming, Steve.
you bet. Thanks. See you guys. See you, everybody.